So the outgoing Secretary of State Mike Pompeo thinks that multiculturalism is un-American. He says this as he's one of the leading positions in a country that's been known as the melting pot of the world. So it really makes you wonder what's going through his head. The idea that multiculturalism is un-American, his excuse is that it's what our enemies use to divide and conquer us. And with that excuse in mind, he's got a bit of a point. Divide and conquer, in its simplest form, is a tried and true tactic. It's very easy to imagine. You see your enemy organized, you break them down into small subsections, you figure out ways to turn those subsections against each other, you watch as the enemy tears themselves apart from the inside, then you go in and you systematically get one after another until you've taken over the whole. In that regard, genius. But the problem with this is that Mike Pompeo's not talking truly about the divisive nature of multiculturalism or how our enemies intend to actually, or how our enemies might actually be using them. His view is rooted in the racist, white nationalist expression of it. His idea is that American culture begins in whenever the first pilgrims came over, 1700s, I'd say. But that is when American culture began. So his idea invalidates the very existence of Native Americans, the true, actual Americans. His idea ignores the reality that there were black people here, that slaves built a culture, had a culture before they came over, before they were enslaved, came over with that culture and adapted it to the situations that they were in. That America was a melting pot, that Asian immigrants, Irish immigrants, that all these different groups that came over and really built this country into being what it is. That is the multiculturalism that makes America. It is not un-American. It is the very point of being in America. Now, again, this comes from his racist, white nationalist views. You can find further support in this in the administration that he's currently leaving with. Trump recently put out the 1776 Commission. And for lack of better words, it's Trump's last rallying cry and attempt to prove that he really is the racist that we all believe he is. Essentially, the 1776 Commission, it's a report, a document, really, put together by a group of people that Trump put in, I want to say, if not earlier in 2020, at some point, including Charlie Kirk and a few other notable right-wing conservative extremists, truly. And essentially, what it boils down to is that it's just a way of saying that America isn't racist. America doesn't have a history of racism. It's trying to say that the left and our enemies are using the idea of America's racism to divide this country, to break people apart, and to make us easier to infiltrate. And again, this would be more acceptable if they weren't rooting it in their own white nationalist racist narrative. The problem here is that they are projecting the problem that they are denying exists. It's complicated, really. They want to vilify the left. They want to vilify anyone that they disagree with. They want to adopt this narrative that they are the true patriots, that right-wing radical conservatism and capitalism is the only way to really be American. And the truth is that's just not true. That this false narrative, this biased view that they have, it doesn't make sense. I mean, let's put some stuff in perspective. If multiculturalism is un-American, then we would all be Native American. Because how else would that have worked? When would white people have been considered American? When would British people have gone from being British colonials to American citizens? Around the time we adopted a constitution, which would make sense. That's how you form a country. After the massive genocide of the natives in this area. So when you hear these things, when you hear these people talk about patriotism, when you hear them talk about our culture, you have to really understand, if it's not inclusive, if it's not fair and equal, if it's not at the heart an open environment that secures the rights and liberties of all Americans, it's not American. It's nationalist, it's probably racist, and it is undeniably wrong.